Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking on a topic that, on the surface, seems pretty simple but is actually incredibly specialized, teaching English to young learners.
Right, universally known as T.
Exactly, TYL. And if you've ever seen a dedicated educator in a room with, say, a dozen 4 to 7-year-olds trying to guide them through a second language.
Oh, it's a performance.
It is. It's this delicate balance of, pure joy, seemingly endless energy, and a really meticulous structure underneath it all.
It really is.
Mm.
And our sources, they just immediately confirm that TL is not, and this is so important, it's not just watering down adult language instruction.
No.
It's a highly specialized field. And it's recognized globally for its unique ability to leverage that developmental window, that cognitive plasticity that's just inherent in early childhood.
That's the crux of it.
And that specialization is what drives all the different methodologies you see worldwide.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're drawing from this really fantastic stack of specialized literature you've shared, and we want to unpack the core philosophies.
Like the Montessori influence, which is huge.
Huge. And then we'll look at how practices vary globally, get into the nuts and bolts of, practical planning, and then analyze the child-centered assessment methods that really define effective TAYL.
And we absolutely must start with that really compelling
Yeah.
moment, right out of the gate.
Okay.
The profound cognitive benefits of starting early. I mean, the research we've looked at, it all points to this growing consensus that introducing English during this early phase, well, it takes unparalleled advantage of that neurological plasticity.
Okay, let's unpack the neurology a little because it is just fascinating. We're talking about the brain's ability to, change and adapt.
To change and adapt, exactly. Younger learners have a demonstrably greater capacity to discriminate between sounds, to acquire them, and then to reproduce new sounds and intonation patterns.
So this is where the famous native-like accent comes from.
It's a huge part of it. This innate skill often leads to the capacity for more native-like pronunciation later on, simply because the brain is still setting those foundational linguistic wiring pathways.
So it's a literal biological and neurological advantage. It's tied directly to age.
Precisely. And, the benefit extends so far beyond just achieving a good accent.
Right.
Early language learning, that constant switching between English and the home language, it enhances overall cognitive flexibility.
And that flexibility, that translates into what? Better problem solving?
Improved problem-solving skills, better sustained attention, and a real boost in something called metalinguistic awareness.
Metalinguistic awareness. Okay, that's the ability to step back and think about language as a system, right? How its rules work.
Exactly.
So how does learning English early actually enhance that specific skill?
We'll think of it like this. When a child is learning two languages at the same time, their brain is constantly comparing and contrasting two distinct sets of grammatical rules, two different sound systems, two vocabulary stores. They are, implicitly analyzing language structure without anyone handing them a grammar book.
We're just absorbing the patterns.
They're absorbing it, and that constant system analysis strengthens those executive function skills. You see children who are bilingual or early English learners often demonstrating improved memory, better concentration, and even more divergent creative thinking.
Why? Just because the brain is getting a workout.
Because the demand of managing those two linguistic systems strengthens the brain's control center. It's like cognitive weightlifting.
So we're not just teaching them words. We are, in effect, building a more robust
Cognitive architecture, exactly. And beyond that, the sources highlight this massive social and cultural upside.
Okay, what do they mean by that?
Early exposure, it just facilitates communication skills in what are increasingly multilingual settings, right?
Right.
It encourages interaction, cooperation, and this is so key for language learning. It greatly reduces the anxiety about making mistakes.
That fear that really holds older learners back.
It paralyzes them. But for a 5-year-old, trying a new word is just a fun game. They haven't learned to be afraid of being wrong yet.
That makes perfect sense.
And culturally, when you introduce English through stories, songs, and games, you're exposing children to global perspectives at their most formative stage. They're internalizing diversity, fostering tolerance, and naturally developing the social skills they need for global citizenship.
So that early start isn't just an academic box to tick.
No, it's a foundational developmental priority. It's preparing them for a truly interconnected world.
That expensive cognitive foundation, it really sets the stage perfectly for our first section where we look at this huge global demand and that, well, the very diverse practices that pop up because English is seen as a necessary skill pretty much everywhere.
The demand is staggering. I mean, it's prompting its introduction at primary and, in many places, preschool levels globally. But the way WEIL is delivered, the methodology that varies drastically based on cultural context, what parents expect, and, national educational priorities.
Right. Which brings us to the first point here. English as a global language and these diverse practices.
Exactly.
So if we look at the Asian context, first countries like China, Japan, South Korea, we see early English viewed primarily through a lens of advancement, right?
Yeah.
Academic and professional.
Absolutely. The sources note that high parental expectations and the intense pressure of competitive exams often filter right down into the early childhood classroom.
That must create a really unique challenge for the teacher.
It's a huge methodological challenge. A teacher in that context can't rely solely on, say, purely communicative, slow-paced, play-based methods.
Why not?
Because the system demands measurable results. So they often adopt what the sources describe as a dual approach.
Okay, a dual approach. What's that look like?
They'll incorporate modern communicative methods, dialogues, games, things to build fluency, but they also maintain a significant, sometimes dominant emphasis on structured memorization.
Like grammar drills and written work, even for the little ones.
Even for the little ones. Because the educational system demands measurable, often summative, academic performance that aligns with future high-stakes testing. The goal is often rapid, demonstrable acquisition.
It sounds like a very pragmatic response to a high-stakes environment.
It is.
Now let's contrast that intensity with the European approach, which often prioritizes a completely different kind of development. We're thinking of, places like Finland or Spain.
The shift in philosophy is, well, it's stark. These nations typically adopt what the sources call play-based, inquiry-based, and communicative approaches.
So English isn't a separate subject to be drilled for a test.
Not in the same way. It's often integrated into everyday activities, science experiments, or arts and crafts. The priority is holistic development, cognitive, emotional, and social. The language acquisition happens organically, supported by the child's natural curiosity.
So the learning is intrinsic. It's not driven by an external test.
Exactly. That focus means that in many of these European systems, the process itself, the communication, the collaboration, developing that intrinsic motivation, often takes precedence over standardized test results until much later on.
And then, importantly, we have to consider developing contexts. Nations across Africa and Latin America, where English is maybe the most urgent tool for economic and social mobility.
The motivation there is incredibly high. It's seen as a direct pathway to opportunity.
But the reality on the ground, that presents some pretty significant logistical challenges.
It does. Classrooms in these contexts might face massive limitations. We're talking about restricted access to teaching materials, a severe lack of simple things, what we call realia, and a big one, a scarcity of consistent high-quality teacher training programs that are actually tailored to TPIO.
So the teachers there have to be extraordinarily creative.
And incredibly resource-conscious. These global snapshots just show the universality of English as a desired skill, but also the sheer diversity of conditions and cultural pressures under which it has to be taught successfully.
And despite all that diversity, whether the classroom is, highly structured in East Asia or resource-limited in a developing context, there are still these defining, non-negotiable features of an effective young learner classroom that just cut across geography.
They absolutely do. And these features are entirely dictated by the constraints and capabilities of early childhood development itself.
Let's get specific on those developmental differences. We mentioned that developmental psychology tells us children have significantly shorter attention spans.
Significant.
So what does that mean for a TL teacher who might have 30 or 40 kids in a room?
It means a radical adherence to variety and pacing. You simply cannot stick with a single activity for more than, say, 7 to 10 minutes max. For a 4-year-old, maybe even less.
So you're constantly shifting gears.
Constantly. Effective TAIL uses these microcycles of activity. A short burst of play, a quick transition song, a brief instruction phase, a high-energy game, and then maybe a quiet, focused craft. This constant variation isn't an option. It's a critical necessity to keep them engaged and prevent, disruptive behavior.
And since language at this age is so fundamentally sensory, it's rooted in concrete experience, the teaching has to match that.
You have to rely heavily on multisensory methods. Absolutely. A child's ability to grasp abstract concepts is still developing. So the teacher has to use visuals, exaggerated gestures, kinesthetic movement, real-life objects, that's the real we mentioned, and simple interactive tech to support comprehension.
It's about grounding the abstract word in something physical.
You're grounding the abstract spoken word in a concrete physical memory trace. For example, the word apple isn't just a sound, it's a shape, it's a color, it's a taste, and it's an object that can be physically held and manipulated.
And the sources also really emphasize the priority of skills. The order matters.
The order is critical. Oral skills, listening and speaking, must be fully established first. We build their linguistic competence through receptive understanding, so listening, and then productive verbalizing, which is speaking, long before we try to translate that into reading and writing.
Which makes sense. It's exactly how we learn our first language.
It perfectly mimics that natural acquisition process. The child absorbs the sounds and rhythm, then begins to experiment verbally. If you introduce print too early, or in a rote, non-contextual way, it can be really demotivating and developmentally inappropriate.
So even with the cultural differences, the structured East Asian models versus the more autonomous Scandinavian ones, the core vibe is the same.
The core classroom vibe for effective TL is universally marked by high creativity, directed movement, and meaningful interaction-rich engagement. Without those elements, the language just remains external and, frankly, temporary.
This emphasis on sensory input and movement, it brings us directly to a specific philosophy that often just profoundly enriches tale.
The Montessori philosophy.
Right, the transformative contribution of Maria Montessori. And this goes way beyond just language instruction. It's a whole approach to how learning and autonomy happen.
The Montessori approach aligns so perfectly with EWL principles because it is fundamentally dedicated to multisensory learning, to independence, and to movement. It systematically transforms what could be abstract language concepts into physical, tangible, and self-directed experiences.
Can you detail some of the specific materials that make this so powerful in a language classroom? Because we're talking about very specific tools here, aren't we?
We are. The sources specifically mention tools like sandpaper letters and movable alphabets. These are designed to integrate tactile, visual, and auditory experiences all at the same time.
Okay, so sandpaper letters, what does that actually look like?
Imagine a child tracing the rough texture of the letter S with their finger, while the teacher is vocalizing the S sound.
Oh.
That physical tracing uses motor memory to connect the feel of the shape to the visual symbol and to the sound. The act of learning becomes physical. It's embodied, and therefore it's profoundly memorable.
So learning is truly embodied. The body is an active part of encoding the memory. And the movement aspect is critical. This is not passive instruction.
Not at all. Children are encouraged to manipulate objects, to arrange the movable word cards to build sentences, or even to physically dramatize the actions implied by verbs. This physical engagement aids retention, and it satisfies the young learner's developmental need to move.
And then there's the emphasis on autonomy, which feels revolutionary.
It is. Learners are trusted to make choices within defined limits. They can work in their own pace, and they take responsibility for cleaning up and managing their own learning materials.
And that autonomy, that fosters what we call intrinsic motivation.
Which is the most powerful engine for sustaining language acquisition. They feel like they're driving their own learning journey, not just, following commands from on high.
And this is all supported by one final core principle, the prepared environment.
Right. The classroom itself has to be orderly, it has to be aesthetically inviting, and it has to be systematically supportive of exploration. An English Corner, for example, designed with labeled objects, simple task cards, and interactive tools, creates the ideal, low-stress conditions for young learners to engage with English naturally.
It's really laying a foundation for a lifetime of self-directed learning.
It is.
But I have to ask, if we go back to the reality of those developing contexts we mentioned, where a teacher might have a 1 to 40 student ratio, how realistic is this individualized, material-heavy Montessori approach? Are the sources offering scalable alternatives?
That's a really essential question. And while a pure one-on-one Montessori classroom is very difficult to scale, the sources stress that the principles are scalable.
Okay, so how do you scale the principles?
You can replicate the multisensory approach using locally sourced materials. Think clay instead of expensive sandpaper letters, or natural objects like stones and leaves for sorting. And you can create communal prepared areas instead of individual workstations. The principle of freedom within limits remains crucial.
So you're still allowing children choice in their tasks, even if the resources are shared.
Exactly. It's about leveraging the philosophy, not just replicating the furniture.
Okay, so moving from that philosophy to the nuts and bolts of daily classroom life. Effective TL requires this highly structured backbone,
It does.
which brings us to section 2, practical implementation. And the cornerstone here has to be thematic instruction.
Thematic instruction is the organizational glue of effective TL planning. It means organizing all of your learning around a central, high-interest theme like animals, or my body, or festivals,
Yeah.
that naturally connects what would otherwise be separate subjects.
So you're connecting language, art, basic science, math, movement, all under one umbrella.
All under one umbrella. It's the ultimate way to reduce the cognitive load for these concrete thinkers. When you're learning vocabulary, you're not just learning a disconnected list of words. You're learning words related to a context that is immediately relevant, tangible, and meaningful to your life.
That makes so much sense.
And our sources define 5 guiding principles that explain the deep power of this approach. The first, and most obvious, is the integration of curriculum areas linking language practice with motor skills and crafts, or analytical thinking when you're sorting things.
And the second principle is vital for motivation, relevance, and meaningfulness.
Right. This ensures that what you're doing in the classroom always has a tangible connection to the children's real-life experiences, like discussing their family members or their favorite foods,
Then you have active learning.
which mandates hands-on exploration, movement, and creativity. Passive listening is minimized, physical engagement is maximized.
And the fourth principle, this brings it back to the philosophy, the child-centered approach.
The theme has to build on the child's innate interests and curiosity. That ensures that the subject matter itself is what drives sustained attention.
And finally, collaboration and interaction.
Exactly. Thematic instruction is ideal for promoting social learning through group work, shared role plays, and pair discussions. When you do it correctly, this whole process enhances memory through context. It builds critical thinking, and it just makes the entire learning experience more enjoyable.
Let's look at the practical applications here, because this is where the planning really comes alive. If you take a theme like animals, walk us through how a teacher would integrate language acquisition across all those different domains.
The animals theme is a classic for a reason. You might connect language acquisition with music by singing action-heavy songs like Old MacDonald Had a Farm, which reinforces animal sounds and actions. That's your listening and speaking skills.
Okay.
Then you integrate literacy through a big book story like The Lion and the Mouse, focusing on sequencing events and talking about character emotions. That's your reading skills.
And the hands-on active learning element would be something tactile.
Precisely. Students might create animal masks from paper plates or build a zoo enclosure for toy animals using blocks, and all the while they're describing their actions in simple English.
And the collaboration piece.
That happens during an animal sound guessing game or a zoo role play where students have specific jobs, vet, zookeeper, visitor, all requiring specific language functions to work together.
And if the theme were, say, festivals, you'd use songs focused on celebration, right? Like Happy Diwali or We Wish You a Merry Christmas. The vocabulary would be focused on keywords like light, gift, celebration, family.
Exactly. And that theme naturally links to social studies. The active component could be festival charades or decorating a festival corner in the classroom where students have to use descriptive adjectives for colors and shapes. The structure ensures that every single activity, from art to music, reinforces the exact same core language set in a varied way.
So you're constantly feeding that vocabulary back to those short attention spans.
Constantly.
This thematic approach, though, it needs rigorous organization. This means planning from the big picture all the way down to the daily blueprint.
Yes, and that starts with long-term planning. This is the organizational roadmap, and it spans a whole term or even an entire semester.
Long-term planning is essential for just making sure you cover everything. Its primary purpose is ensuring that all the mandated topics and skills, from colors and numbers to basic greetings, are systematically covered over the course of the term.
And that the classroom activities align with the curriculum goals. For instance, a long-term plan might structure a 4-week unit on seasons.
Okay, so what would that look like?
Week 1 focuses on vocabulary and stories about weather and seasonal clothing. Week 2 involves cross-curricular arts and crafts, like making a season's wheel and describing the colors they're using.
Right.
Week 3 integrates music and movement, singing rain, rain, go away, and role-playing seasonal activities, which focuses on verb tenses. And then week 4 is assessment and review, often through a field trip or maybe a little indoor exhibit they create.
So the thematic unit plan takes that monthly goal and breaks it down over several days or weeks.
Yes, and focuses on sequential learning. moving methodically from simple recognition, which is receptive, to more complex application, which is productive.
And then finally, we get to the daily lesson plan, the specific short-term blueprint.
And its purpose is multifaceted. It guarantees precise time management, it allows for differentiation to help specific learners, and crucially, it builds teacher confidence and minimizes that need to just improvise on the fly. It's the step-by-step description of exactly what the teacher and the learner will do minute by minute.
And the required components here are rigorous. You need the specific theme, razor-sharp learning objectives, what the child should be able to do by the end, the specific materials needed, the step-by-step activities with time limits, a plan for assessment, and finally, the essential reflection section.
And that reflection section is where the real learning happens for the teacher. They record notes on what worked, what needed more time, and why certain kids struggled or excelled. That self-analysis ensures continuity and progression, and it feeds directly back into the planning for the next day.
Planning the content is only half the battle, though. You have to plan the environment and the behavior just as much.
Effective classroom management is vital. It ensures a predictable, safe, respectful, and productive environment. It minimizes disruptions, and it maximizes that precious instructional time.
And the ultimate goal here, especially if you're leaning on philosophies like Montessori, is to promote self-discipline and foster responsibility.
It's all about creating that necessary freedom within limits. The structure has to empower the child.
So what are the core principles that support this goal? How do you turn potential chaos into constructive energy?
Well, our sources detail 6 core principles. Consistency is foundational. Predictable routines, rules, and teacher responses make children feel psychologically secure.
That reduces anxiety.
It reduces anxiety and uncertainty. Then respect and empathy, ensuring fair treatment, actively listening and acknowledging the child's feelings. And engagement. This is a big one. The principle that a well-prepared, busy child is a well-behaved child.
Boredom breeds misbehavior.
Always. And crucially, the emphasis must always be on positive reinforcement. Using praise, encouragement, specific verbal affirmation. I love how you put the blocks away, rather than focusing on punitive measures.
And the last two.
You need a preparedness. Having all your materials ready to go eliminates that lag time, which is a key disruptor. And finally, flexibility. You have to acknowledge that a group of 4-year-olds might just be having an off day, and the teacher needs to be able to adjust on the fly.
Translating these principles into action, that requires specific structural components in the actual management plan.
Yes. First, simple, clearly defined rules or expectations, and they have to be positively stated, so you focus on the desired action. Use walking feet inside rather than don't run. Second, structured daily routines, often supported by a visual schedule with pictures or symbols, so children know exactly what comes next.
And we need methods for smooth transitions. That time between activities is where chaos can just erupt.
It's prime time for chaos. Transitions have to be guided using specific mechanisms like songs, rhymes, or countdowns. Singing a short, familiar cleanup song signals the end of free play. A countdown from 5 signals it's time to move from the rug to the tables. It's all about predictability.
And this is where that idea of learner autonomy and responsibility comes full circle. Rotating classroom jobs.
Giving children concrete responsibility, line leader, door holder, snack helper, it gives them a sense of ownership over their classroom. And finally, you need proactive behavior management, which focuses on guidance and redirection, not punishment.
So all these things, the greeting song, the visual schedules, the jobs, they reinforce structure while nurturing their independence.
Exactly. It's a system that supports both.
With that philosophical and structural foundation in place, now we can dive into the actual language instruction. And we have to start with the 2 foundational skills in SLOW, listening and speaking.
Listening and speaking, or LS, are the first skills acquired. It mirrors how kids learn their native language. And the sources are really emphatic that in contexts like Nepal, where English exposure outside of school is super limited, LS proficiency is best developed through high-engagement, immersive methods.
Like repetitive songs, dynamic stories, and low-stress role play.
Exactly.
Let's elaborate on the active strategies that make LS stick for young learners. The gold standard for initial comprehension is total physical response, or TPR.
KPR is revolutionary because it associates language directly with movement. It builds comprehension physically, bypassing the need for complex translation or abstract explanation.
So when the teacher says stand up, the child stands up.
The motor engagement creates a concrete memory trace. It makes the language acquisition implicit rather than declarative. It works best for action verbs, prepositions, simple commands.
And next is story-based learning. This is more than just reading a book aloud, right?
Oh, much more. It requires props, exaggerated intonation, and repetition. Teachers should select simple, predictable stories. And crucially, they have to incorporate prediction questions. What will happen next to the cat? And use puppets or felt board characters to make the narrative visual and interactive.
And having the children join in on the repetitive parts.
That reinforces pronunciation and rhythm beautifully.
And then puppet interaction, which is a favorite in any early childhood setting.
Puppets are brilliant because they provide a non-threatening source of input. The child speaks to the puppet, not the teacher, which lowers what we call the affective filter.
The psychological barrier to speaking.
Exactly. This technique is indispensable for shy or hesitant students.
And of course, the bedrock of early learning, songs and rhymes.
Songs and rhymes are absolutely foundational. They teach rhythm, stress, intonation, and pronunciation naturally, elements that are so difficult to drill explicitly. A song like Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Toes simultaneously teaches vocabulary, TPR, and the rhythm of English speech, all while providing that necessary physical movement.
They're powerful memory anchors.
To put this into practice, let's design a multi-layered LS lesson using that animal theme again.
Okay, a sample lesson would start with a high-energy warm-up, singing Old MacDonald with all the gestures. The presentation phase would use puppets, a cat, a dog to introduce the animal names and their sounds, repeated with exaggerated movements.
And for practice.
Practice happens with a Guess the Animal sound game. Students close their eyes, listen to the sound, then point to the right flashcard. That's a listening check.
And then production is when they have to speak. Right. Production involves pair work role play, where students greet each other and ask, "How are you?" while pretending to be an animal. It demands active negotiation of meaning. It's multi-layered, dynamic, and it addresses both listening comprehension and spoken output.
Now, the critical transition to reading and writing, RW. This has to be approached so carefully.
Developmentally, the literacy skills have to be integrated seamlessly, taught within a meaningful context, and heavily supported visually. You have to avoid the trap of isolated phonics drills or rote memorization.
And the sources specifically mention that in multilingual classrooms, visuals and realia are crucial to bridge that gap between home languages and the abstract nature of English print.
You have to. You have to use strategies that connect the abstract written text directly back to the concrete, already acquired spoken language. Shared reading is vital.
Okay, so what is shared reading?
The teacher reads a big book and deliberately points to the words as they're spoken. That's called tracking. Students join in, building recognition of sight words and learning that we read from left to right. It builds confidence and shows how spoken words map to print.
Then there's guided writing. This helps learners overcome that initial hurdle of just forming letters and generating their own text.
Exactly. With guided writing, the teacher models a simple sentence or a pattern. For example, "I like the cat," on the whiteboard. And the students copy that pattern, just filling in the blank with a new word they know. It builds writing confidence and structure without demanding the child generate the entire sentence from scratch.
And the technique of sequencing and labeling.
This is so powerful because it connects abstract text to a tangible experience. Students arrange story pictures in chronological order, that's sequencing, and then they label those pictures or real objects. It directly connects the written language to the physical experience they just had.
Let's design a sample RW lesson using a classroom theme.
Okay, a lesson might start with a warm-up, singing a simple rhyme about classroom items. For the presentation, you'd show real objects, a book, a pencil, a chair paired with large, clear word cards.
Practice would be a matching game.
Right. Students physically match the real object to the correct word card. That's reading comprehension. And then for production, students would be asked to draw one classroom object and then use that guided writing technique to label it with its English name. It makes the print connection relevant and provides immediate application.
So vocabulary is the real engine of all of this, and the teaching methods have to maximize retention.
Absolutely. The core principle is that teaching must be contextual, visual, and interactive. You have to avoid those tedious, isolated word lists.
And the teaching hierarchy is critical here, moving from the known to the unknown, and from the concrete to the abstract. How does a teacher ensure high retention?
The thematic approach is primary, because context is a huge memory aid. You teach words related to a central topic like colors when you're painting, or fruits during snack time, When words are encountered repeatedly across different activities, they move from short-term to long-term memory.
And the heavy reliance on visual aids.
Absolutely essential. Flashcards, charts, and real objects have to be used consistently. If you're teaching big and small, you have to show a big ball and a small ball. You have to pair the word with the visual and physical experience.
And the visual component should extend to the classroom itself, creating an immersive environment.
That's right. The sources recommend permanent word walls and displays that are easily visible. They provide constant long-term visual exposure to the target vocabulary, acting as a living dictionary for the kids.
And games.
And of course, games. Things like bingo, matching, and guess the word make practice interactive and highly memorable. Our sources highlight that especially in low English exposure context, this kind of visual, repetitive, and contextual teaching is paramount for success.
Okay, so let's talk about grammar. This is where adult learners so often stumble because of all the abstract rules. How do we make grammar tangible and communicative for young learners?
The shift has to be away from memorizing abstract rules like defining an adjective or a preposition. Grammar should be experienced through meaningful language use.
So it's embedded in stories, sung in songs, practiced through natural interaction.
Right. And the most powerful technique is the inductive approach.
Okay, the inductive approach. That means helping children notice the patterns first, rather than starting with a definition. Can you give an example of how that works?
Sure. Instead of saying a preposition of place shows location, the teacher just uses the pattern over and over again. The book is on the table. The pencil is under the chair. The cat is behind the door.
So after many repetitions, they just internalize the rule.
They implicitly understand the function of on, under, behind, and they start to produce those patterns correctly without ever having defined preposition. That's communicative grammar.
We talked about the Montessori materials earlier. How do they leverage tactile input for grammar specifically?
The Montessori system is fantastic for visualizing syntax. They use color-coded word cards to represent parts of speech. Nouns might be black, verbs are bright red, adjectives are blue.
So children aren't just memorizing word order, they're physically manipulating these colored cards to build sentences.
They're feeling it. This tactile organization helps them see and feel that the verb always comes after the subject in a simple English sentence, or that the adjective always comes before the noun. It creates a visual, kinetic understanding of syntax.
That's a brilliant way to make an abstract rule concrete. And then there's action grammar.
Action grammar uses TPR principles for structure. For prepositions, like we said, you act them out, stand behind the chair. You can also use it for simple tenses. If you're teaching present continuous, the teacher says, I am jumping, and acts it out. The children follow and repeat, associating the grammatical pattern I am, plus verbing directly with the action.
Let's construct a sample grammar lesson using the prepositions of place theme.
Okay, start with the singing warm-up. The presentation phase uses a single toy, a teddy bear, and one box. The teacher places the bear in the box, on the box, under the box, repeating the structure and pointing.
Then practice involves student commands.
One student says, put the bear next to the box, and another performs the action. And production moves to describing pictures. The teacher shows a picture of an animal in a tree, and the student has to verbally produce the structure. The monkey is in the tree.
So the learning progression is physical, fun, and immediately communicative.
Leading the child to induce the rule from repeated correct usage.
We've covered the entire teaching framework. Now we have to tackle evaluation. So, Section 4, assessment. And this is a unique challenge. Assessment has to be developmentally appropriate and, most importantly, non-threatening.
Anxiety affects children so strongly. If testing is formal or stressful, it can completely mask genuine competence, especially for shy or low-confidence learners.
So our sources define some clear guiding principles for TEAL assessment to make sure it's effective and humane. First up is validity.
Right. Validity just means, does the assessment actually test what it's supposed to? For example, if you're testing listening comprehension, the response should be nonverbal, like pouting, not requiring the child to write a long answer.
Okay, that makes sense. Then there's reliability, consistent results.
And since children's performance can vary wildly day to day based on mood or energy, reliability is achieved not through a single high-stakes written test, but through simple, consistent criteria and, crucially, multiple observations taken across various contexts over time.
Fairness and inclusivity are also critical, especially in a multilingual classroom.
You have to accommodate every type of learner. That means offering multiple options to demonstrate knowledge. Oral response, picture selection, physical movement, or drawing. And finally, the tasks have to be age-appropriate, using clear visuals, short, high-interest tasks, and avoiding complex instructions.
This holistic approach means collecting different types of evidence to build a full picture of the child's progress. What kind of evidence should a TAIL teacher be documenting?
They should collect 4 essential types. Performance-based evidence includes active demonstrations like role plays or retelling a story. Process-based evidence is collected during instruction. This is mainly observation notes, checklists, and anecdotal records.
Then you have the tangible output, the actual work.
That's product-based evidence.
Yeah.
Their drawings, completed crafts, labeled worksheets, and finally the portfolio, which documents progress over time. It's a curated collection of the other 3 types of evidence to show growth, not just a final grade.
And for the teachers and parents, the specific terminology of evaluation is essential to understand. Let's do a quick shortcut to define and differentiate the key concepts.
We start with the fundamental distinction. Assessment is the systematic collection of data about learner progress. Evaluation is the interpretation and judgment of that data, deciding if the instruction was successful.
And the distinction between the 2 types of assessment that guide teaching, formative versus summative.
Formative assessment is assessment for learning. It's low stress, immediate, and happens continually during instruction. A quick thumbs-up-down check on understanding, a fast-paced game. Its only purpose is to help the teacher adjust instruction on the spot.
And summative.
Summative assessment is assessment of learning. It's given at the end of a unit or term, measuring overall cumulative achievement.
And a vital tool for organizing and scoring these observations, especially the performance-based tasks, is the rubric.
A rubric is a scoring guide with clear, predetermined criteria. For young learners, complexity is the enemy. So instead of complex numerical scales, TEYL rubrics should use simple visual symbol stars or smiley faces to increase fairness and clarity.
And the overall goal should be authentic assessment.
Tasks that mirror real-life language use. Following directions for a craft or participating in a short, realistic dialogue, this increases motivation and radically reduces test anxiety.
The ultimate non-negotiable principle here is that assessment has to feel like a natural learning task or a fun game, not a test. So how do we design these child-friendly activities across the 4 skills?
For listening, the tasks must be purely action-based. Examples are listen and point to the correct flashcard, or following action instructions like take the red crayon and put it under the chair.
For speaking, tasks should be communicative and brief.
Like a picture description, what do you see? Or a simple show and tell about a favorite toy, or a short, structured role play to assess fluency and interaction skills.
Reading is about recognition and simple comprehension.
So tasks would include word-picture matching, simple reading aloud of a familiar sentence to check confidence, or sequencing pictures from a story.
And finally, writing has to be developmentally paced, focusing on those pre-literacy skills.
Right. So writing tasks should start with tracing and copying letters or simple words, then move to labeling pictures, and then use guided writing, offering a simple sentence frame like, I have a meat, where the child only fills in one known word.
And we can integrate all of this across a thematic unit. Using that animals theme again, walk us through how all 4 skills get assessed naturally.
Okay, within that unit, you assess listening by having them point to the animals the teacher names. You assess speaking by having them describe the animal's size or color. You assess reading by matching the animal names to the pictures on a worksheet. And the writing portfolio contains a labeled drawing of their favorite animal.
So all 4 skills are assessed continuously within activities that were already planned. It's a process, not an event.
Exactly. It makes the evaluation continuous and natural.
Moving into our final section, 2EYL has to continually evolve to prepare children not just for school, but for the complex requirements of the modern world.
Which means integrating 21st century skills.
These skills, creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication, the 4 Cs, they're not optional add-ons anymore.
No, they're essential for ensuring students become adaptable, innovative, and functional global citizens.
So let's start with creativity and critical thinking. How do we foster those skills using English as the working language?
Creativity is about generating original ideas. So you foster it through open-ended tasks like story creation, draw what happens after the story ends, or original art projects that require descriptive language.
And critical thinking, that's reasoning and problem solving.
Right, it's moving beyond simple recall. We can set up specific language-dependent scenarios.
Give us one of those scenarios. How does the language facilitate the critical thinking?
Take a puzzle. The cat cannot reach the milk on the high shelf. What should the cat do? Students have to use conditional language. If the cat jumps, it might fall. To suggest solutions, reason out the best choice, and then justify their reasoning in simple English.
So it turns language into a tool for active reasoning.
Exactly.
Next, collaboration and communication. These are inherently social skills.
So the strategies have to encourage shared responsibility. Pair, or group storytelling, promotes turn-taking and active listening as they build a story sentence by sentence.
And tier teaching.
Peer teaching is so powerful. Asking a student who's mastered a concept to explain it to a classmate reinforces their own comprehension and builds empathy. And cooperative games team challenges ensure that language success requires collective effort.
Finally, technology integration. Our sources are very clear. Technology must be for creation, not just passive consumption.
The focus is on enhancing learning outcomes with digital tools. So instead of just watching a video, students should be actively creating content.
Like what?
Using digital storytelling apps where they record their own narration over images they drew, or recording short dialogues for a mini podcast to share with parents, or using interactive platforms like Kahoot to practice vocabulary collaboratively. Technology serves the language goal. It's not the goal itself.
And the teacher has to continually adapt to integrate all of this. This is where professional growth through reflection becomes essential.
Particularly in a field as dynamic as TPRIL.
So what exactly is reflective practice?
It's the deliberate, structured process where teachers critically analyze their instructional experiences, what happened, why it happened, and what they'll change next time to ensure continuous improvement. It's non-negotiable for effective TL.
And our sources identify 3 levels of reflection, which provide a really powerful framework.
Yes. Descriptive reflection is just detailing what happened. I taught the prepositions lesson. Most students were engaged. Simple.
Okay.
Analytical reflection delves into the why. The lesson worked well because the physical object reinforced the abstract concept, but the visual learners needed more flashcards.
And the most impactful level is critical reflection.
Critical reflection considers the broader implications and alternatives. The teacher steps back and asks, if 10% of my class was still confused, was the instruction culturally relevant? Next time, I'll include a small group activity where children physically move their bodies behind the door to make it more memorable. This self-assessment drives real change.
And this analysis feeds directly into effective professional development, or PD. What are the best PD methods for TL teachers?
PD has to be collaborative and practical. Peer teaching sessions are highly effective, where colleagues simulate lessons for immediate feedback. Workshops should be hands-on, focusing on skill acquisition, and collaborative action research empowers teachers to investigate a real-world classroom issue together.
So these approaches ensure that growth is continuous, evidence-based, and immediately applicable.
Right.
We've traveled from the deep cognitive benefits of starting early, all the way to the global contexts that shape instruction, and finally through the specifics of play-based teaching and non-threatening assessment.
And the core takeaway from this deep dive is, I think, very clear. Effective TL requires balancing developmental needs of those short attention spans and concrete thinking with a really specialized pedagogy.
And that specialized pedagogy, it hinges on rigorous structure, long-term planning, thematic units, excellent management, which then actively supports high-energy, multisensory input, movement, and a continuous child-friendly assessment process.
One that values observation and participation over a simple grade. The successful TYL classroom is one where structure and planning actively support genuine, spontaneous engagement and curiosity.
And we began this discussion by highlighting the Montessori approach, which champions independence, choice, and the responsibility of the child from such an early age.
It makes them active agents in their own learning process.
And that leads us to our final provocative thought for you today. If the ultimate goal of TL is to nurture independence, curiosity, and responsibility skills that are far more valuable than language proficiency alone, how might we adjust our traditional assessment methods today to better measure the global readiness and lifelong learning potential of tomorrow's children, rather than just their vocabulary count?
It's a great question.
Think about that balance of structure and freedom, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.